Hello, messy families. Thanks for joining us on today's episode. This is a topic that we have been asked, requested, or maybe demanded.
And I think there's some people who are listening to it, even though their kids have toddlers, because they're like, you know what? I'm just curious. What is their intake on this? You know, maybe you're a little closer to your dating life than your kids' dating life.
That's right, and that's okay.
Exactly. I'd love people's thoughts on this, honestly.
And it's always good to think in advance. So for those in
That's true.
Either it's right upon you.
What do we think about this?
Or you're in the midst of it. That's great. But even in advance, I think it's worth thinking
Before we jump into this, though, we just want to mention the fact that we have our survey out there. So if you could please go and take our survey and help us help you. So we know what you want to talk to us about, what do you want us to talk about, how we can do better, all of that.
And this survey really does impact our work and our efforts. And this is really helping us make that plan for next year and for how we serve. You may or may not have, an extra 5-10 minutes, but if you were able to carve out of your life 5 or 10 minutes, it will have a powerful impact on the way that we work and the way that we serve marriage and family. So we'd love to hear from you. All right. So before we do the full topic, I'm just going to make one mention.
Okay.
And that is, this is a shout out to Katie. You know who you are. This is a topic that we did because you kind of confronted us with like, okay, you did a podcast regarding dating many, many years ago. When we
our listener Katie said this, not our daughter Katie.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, thank you for that clarity. And
there's more of a question.
I forgot that in that episode when we recorded many, many years ago, we said, well, we're at the very beginning of our dating and we'll let you know how it goes.
Right, because I think that dating podcast was like the 6th or 7th.
Yeah, it was early on in the first year or so.
Right.
And so now that we have launched on,
that's right.
We've
had lots of kids date.
Yep.
Yes. So we're kind of at a different place right now in that when we first started, I think it was just Katie and Patrick were dating, but now so Katie and Patrick are 2 oldest, but now we have 2 teenage sons, numbers 6 and 7, Hernan's number 6 and 7, who are both in relationships in high school.
That's right.
So we have a particular philosophy about what we believe about dating, why it's important. And I think what I think is interesting about this topic is that it's one of those things on which good Catholics can disagree.
That's right. And that's okay.
Because we do know really great, amazing Catholic families who don't let their kids date in high school.
And so there are many ways to approach this, and we want to give you some insights that I think will be beneficial regardless of when you allow your kids to, if you allow your kids to, if it's something that you're not even thinking about, right? These are some good food for thought, but there is a direct concern that we hear a lot, like, should I let my kids date? When should I let what does that look like? Because there is, there's a lot of people who just are concerned.
Well, let's talk about the non-dating people who don't let their kids date. So first of all, and I think there's lots of reasons to not let your kids date in high school. They just maybe feel like their kids are not ready for relationships. And first of all, let me just say on the outset that there is certainly a lot of good that comes from that.
Saying that your kids really shouldn't date. Is what you're saying.
Exactly. So, and the reason I want to say that is because I don't want people emailing us saying, well, I didn't date in high school and I'm so glad that I didn't. And then that's great. And that's awesome. And I didn't date in high school either.
That's right.
And that's perfectly wonderful. But now as an adult as a parent, looking at my kids, I kind of see it with different eyes, and I see a couple like disadvantages, I think. And so some of the fears that people have, go ahead.
Right, well, again, just to say, we have sympathy for those who choose not to date.
It's kind of like people who don't let their kids have a phone. Right. I think it's very
similar. And we can see some great wisdom in that, and we understand where you're coming from. And so if you choose that, more power to you. Great. Sure. And there is definitely a way to do that and do it in a healthy way.
But we want you to go in with your eyes wide open and realize that what you're choosing. Yeah.
And so oftentimes when those, or at least some of the concerns we hear from parents, I'll say, because they're oftentimes coming with the idea that there's some fears about entering what this dating world is because they see the secular world. They see all that's out there and the crap that's there. But their first inclination is that they don't want to put their kids into some compromising situations, into situations where they're kind of getting caught up in a dating relationship that will then lead to sex.
Well, make it harder for their kids to be chased if
right.
they're dating.
They skip to the end. As parents, we play things forward.
And I just want to kind of burst that bubble real quick, is that sometimes maybe that's true, but I went to high school in a lay community where there was no dating allowed and kids still had sex. I mean, it's still wrong either way,
right.
But I don't know if that's exactly the answer.
Yeah. And so we know plenty,
for a very big problem.
Right? And it's like there is concerns with that that are outside of whether they date or not, just because that's just a reality. It happens, right? And no dating doesn't prevent your kids necessarily from doing things that you don't want them to.
And it doesn't necessarily mean that their hearts won't get broken, because that's another thing, is that forming attachments and that their hearts gets broken. Guess what? My heart was broken in high school.
And you weren't dating.
And I still wasn't dating. There's a concern that they're too immature for relationships. And I think for some parents that they don't want their kids to date because they kind of feel like it's a loss of their own control, and that they're like, if I let them hang out with that boy or girl, like, what are they doing? Like, what are they doing during, with that boy, with that girl during this time? And I guess that, again, like, we're going to go through and talk a little bit about these things, but when your kids start getting more independent, they could still be hanging out one-on-one with that boy/girl.
Yeah.
So we have chosen to allow our kids over 16 to date. And so what we're going to do is we're going to talk about why we've chosen to allow them to date, some of the advantages, and then what do we believe about dating?
All right. So before we go too deep into this, I think it's important to kind of
clarify our terms.
Yeah, distinguish a little bit here. Again, we'll break this down, then we'll get to some both the principle and some practicals.
Right.
When talking about kids and dating. So we are there's two broad categories that we there, we haven't run a ton of books on this, so maybe there's a better term, but we're going to call it friendship dating and more courtship or more serious dating, right? And so we have allowed our kids over the age of
we added this part about the two extremes.
Okay. Yeah. I'm sorry, I jumped to the definition.
No,
sorry,
that's okay. That's okay.
All right, go ahead and we'll start with this.
Just first of all, I feel like in looking at culture and looking at how human beings operate throughout, I always think about this. I kind of go back and think, 100 years ago, how would have mom have done this? Or 1,000 years ago, how would this have been handled? Whatever situation it is. And you have to think about the dating thing like that.
Yeah.
In that hundreds of years ago, right, throughout all centuries, young people, when they became 13, 14, 15 years old, had desires, had attraction to young people of the opposite sex, right?
Which is a beautiful thing.
Exactly. And I remember when I was a teenager, liking some boy or something, talking to my mom about dating. My mom was like, she was talking about her own experience growing up in the 50s and 60s. She's like, I went on dates. She went on dates all the time when she was 14, 15 years old.
Yep.
People at that time, they really did. Boys and girls hung out one-on-one in dating kind of relationships, either dating, going out on a date, or going steady, going steady. Like
I got nothing there.
From Bye Bye Birdie. Anyway, okay. Going steady for good. Anyway, sorry, I digress. Anyway, so that was kind of a more very popular, and kids would go dating, go out with boys and girls all the time.
So that was your mom's experience.
That was my mom's experience
in the days.
But then my experience was when I was growing up, and maybe this is in like reaction to the sexual revolution and to a lot of teenagers being very promiscuous, in the 70s and 80s for sure. Right. Teen sexual activity was kind of at an all-time high in the 70s and 80s. And where I grew up, we were part of a lay community that believed, or that put out there, I don't know, that the rule, I got put rule in quotes, was no dating,
They had a no
until
dating
you were, they had a
policy.
no dating policy until you were ready to get married, basically. So
And
even
so you
for
were
college students,
you were under that basic.
right. And so even for college students, they had a no dating policy because dating is for marriage. So if you're not ready to get married, you're not ready to date. And so I don't know if my parents completely bought into that philosophically, but they were part of this community. And so they supported the rule because they were like,
Right.
hey, this is the way of life. This is what we're going to do. And so this is the tact that they took in raising me and my brothers and sisters.
And there is really some truth in some of the fears, right? The fears of what was happening. And so that really led to some kind of Christian, faithful Catholic families adopting this, no dating policy.
Right.
But then it also led to some Christian students, Catholic students, that we were like, dating is only exclusively when you're ready to get married, which again, there's truth to that. There's truth to the idea that dating is oriented towards marriage. But then they were like, well, I'm not even going to date you until I'm ready to propose to you.
Right. Or a girl thinks, oh, if he asked me out for coffee, then, I need to start thinking, oh, could I marry this guy? Right away. Like, it's like, whoa.
The second date is not the most appropriate time to start asking about family size and
how many kids do you want to have, whatever. And we see that at some really great Catholic colleges that people aren't dating because a lot of the guys will say, oh, the girls take dating so seriously. And the girls are saying, oh, well, the guys don't ask anybody out to date because and it's led to some things that I'm like, could this be prevented?
Well, and it's led to this idea of elimination of progressive, if you will, getting more serious in dating, that it's either you're all in or there's no entry point. It's either you're not.
Exactly. No entry point.
And it created these two extremes, right? You have a very secular world and you kind of have a more...
Because they're not dating in the secular world either.
That's right. Well, and there's different reasons.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So you've got a secular world on one side and you've got a kind of... I don't want to put it in a fundamentalist, but a Christian reaction or a conservative reaction to the secular world. And the secular world, though, today we have the hookup culture. That first it started with separating sex from marriage. So you had sex premarital, right? And then you actually separate sex from relationship today, right?
Even worse.
so it's going farther and farther removed where you're friends with benefits. That it's just, hey, you know what? We don't need to, whether it be
not even friends with partial benefits, or we don't even have to be friends. I don't even have to know you.
And that has removed so far the idea of what marriage is and the relationship and the beauty.
How to build a relationship.
That it has removed, because again, just from a purely utilitarian is not maybe the right word to say, but even from the before, the goods of marriage were preserved in marriage and marriage alone. And the culture basically understood that.
Yeah.
And now they're thrown around as if they can be given at any time. And that has affected our view of dating in addition to marriage, right?
Exactly.
So we have to look at
There's like a trickle down. If marriage is being affected, guess what? Dating is also being affected.
And then people from just a purely secular standpoint would look and say, I need to delay marriage until I have a fully stable job, which, as a dad, I'm okay. I want some stability, right? But there's a secular notion where it's all about kind of like having my stuff. I need to have
everything ready and then I can get married.
Yeah, I have a checklist.
Doesn't usually work
perfection,
like that.
Right?
Yeah.
And I need a secure job. I need to figure out this. I need to have my life, and I have all my stuff in my life ordered my way before I'm willing to go somewhere else. And again, there's some truth in all of this. It's not that it's awful, but it then again, it heightens from even a secular standpoint, this idea of marriage and dating is like, okay, well, if I'm not ready for that, then I'm not ready for layers of commitment that come before that. That doesn't prepare me. It's again, pushing marriage farther and farther away.
Kind of feels unnatural.
Yeah. And again, that affects the way we see it. But then clearly the Christian side, we already kind of talked about.
But then I feel like, because I feel like the Christians then are people who are living their faith seriously, have almost like this fear of being alone with a girl because we might have sex. It's like, okay, wait. It's kind of time out. Like you have to have some kind of possession of yourself.
That's right.
To be able to sit and calmly get to know somebody and have a relationship, and because if you don't, then this is also pushing marriage farther and farther away.
Right.
So you don't have to have all of your ducks in a row. So first of all,
the reason we bring those up is that we're all influenced on some level by those extremes, right?
True.
And I'm not saying in either one of those there isn't some truth in them, right? But as a father of 6 daughters, I want to know how is this young man going to provide for my daughter? But I don't ask that when they go on the first date.
When they're 16, yeah,
I don't ask them
exactly.
when even early college. Right. That's not my primary focus. It's about who they are and their character.
Let's do this first, and then we'll go back. All right. So what are we talking about? So there's friendship dating and courtship. All right. What are we talking about? Friendship dating. Friendship dating is what our kids have experienced when they can drive, basically like over the age of 16 until like later college. So I would say later high school, 16, 17, 18, and then early college years.
Right.
We would encourage them to date because if you think about it, if your child is able to drive, number one, they can kill somebody, they can kill themselves. I mean, driving is a huge responsibility.
It's a huge responsibility. And again, every responsibility comes, or every power comes with responsibility.
And so if your kid can drive, if you're allowing your child to drive, I think you should allow them to be able to be in a relationship with a person of the opposite sex. And what do I mean by that? I mean that this is like an individual friendship, like that this person, this boy or this girl has a kind of a similar priority than their other friends. So like my son, Jim, right now, he hangs around with his guy friends, half of the time. And then he also has his girlfriend that he also goes out with occasionally.
It's not disproportionate.
Yes, exactly. It's living in balance. She is not the sole focus of all of his relationships. No, she is, but she is special in that she's a girl. and it helps him to develop that girlfriend relationship with a young lady. And to allow our children to do that, we have to be aware and keep it from getting too intense. We need to make sure that it's very clear that you are just friends. You are friendship dating. Yes, she's a special friend, basically, but this isn't to be all of the time that you have is spend with this. So this is like, so our girl, so just an example. Right. So our boys in high school, they had a girlfriend. They would take her to dances, take her to an occasional date where they went out for dinner. They would be invited over to her family's house, or she would come over our house for dinner. It's basically like a best friend.
Yeah. It's creating some level of specialness in this, but it's not disproportionate. And we are, again, like a lot of things, and we'll get into this later, but it's like once you give them a new level of responsibility, that means that your responsibility went up as well.
Exactly. Again, like the phone thing.
Yeah. And we get it. And we know that it requires more of us. And I'm actually going to jump back to this. One of the things that we heard from an older parent that I thought was really just a wise way to look at this is not just dating, but things in general in our home. We want to create a yes culture for our kids, meaning we don't say yes to everything that they want, but we do try to make sure we set that as a hope and an expectation.
Our default is yes, unless there's a good reason to say no.
Right, because we and I'll use this example. Starting off in junior high, you know what our kids ask for? They ask for phones. Before that, at least for our kids, that would never came up. But when junior high rolls around, their friends have phones.
Like our 11-year-old has not asked for a phone, but our 12-year-old has.
Yes. And it's actually pretty, and I think it's a social thing. Their peers are having it, and we get all the time, Dad, everyone's doing it. And we just say, no. But we say, you will earn that responsibility later, both by your maturity, and even then we don't give them a smartphone. We're now all in on dumb phones, or at least a Gab phone or
Wise phone
and all of that. But that's a whole other topic, right? But the reason I bring that up is that we want to be able to say yes. So we say, we're not saying no to you and to your freedom and to what you want to do. But we're saying yes to, hey, you want to get together with your friends? You want to communicate with them? Hey, we're going to create this. Here's a public family computer where you can connect with your friends, or you can use our phone to text, but now we have control. Now we have some level of this, and we hold off that phone until they're in high school, until they've got a layer of and again, I think we talked about this in technology. We actually make our kids do a presentation on why they should.
You're getting distracted.
I am. But similarly, dating in junior high. What do you always say?
So I literally make my kids say the mantra: dating in junior high is stupid, and because it really is. I mean, all of them. A number of our kids, the boys specifically, have wanted to date a girl, or we found out that they tapped a girl and this is my girlfriend when I'm 12,
having other siblings 13, or spies.
And we've had to say, no, we don't do that. And pull them back. So, but when they get, we try to explain to them, this is why, because you're just not ready. When I said to my son, Pat, when he was 12, I'm like, honey, you can't even chew with your mouth closed yet. Like, I'm not ready to unleash you upon the female population in Steubenville. So, but as he got older, when he was 16, he did start dating at that point. So we want to have this and culture.
And another, using an analogy, we use the phone, but then think about driving. We've had kids who want to drive earlier, but the state of Ohio, for us and your state, doesn't allow them to drive with a permit until they're of a certain age. And then even then they have to take a test. And then they're kind of in this mentoring stage where they're learning how to drive. They're driving only with a parent during the permitting stage. And then even then they still have a restricted license about when they can travel, who can be in the car with them. All of those things come in, and you look at that and say, okay, you had talked about this earlier about the fact that, we're at the age of 16, they are able to drive a dangerous vehicle. It's a tool that could be of great freedom for us in helping them pick up their siblings, them having some new level of independence and a new power that they possess. But there is responsibility. There are checks, there are tests, there is mentoring. There's all of this that goes on. And that's why when we look at that, kind of using that as the analogy, saying in dating, that's what we want to be able to have. We don't want to just say, hey, you're 13 years old, here's the keys to the car. That's idiotic. They don't have the capacity, the capability, the physical, mental, emotional maturity to do this. Well, when they're dating, you don't want to just give them the keys to the car and say, have fun. Yeah. That we do, and we'll get into this more.
We have a period of mentorship.
Both testing and mentorship, and still with restrictions so that they begin a process. And there's a progression that isn't necessarily a date certain, that now you're unrestricted. It's a movement towards that, because there is some wisdom in.
And the reason we bring up the driving thing is that if you trust your child to drive, why wouldn't you trust them to start working on a relationship with another young man or woman?
That's
in a restricted sense.
That's right. Okay. Limited and controlled. But go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, because the difference between that friendship dating and the kind of dating where you were saying there is some truth to this. Are you ready to get married? Do you have a stable job? All of that. That I would call courtship.
Right.
Like that's like
the more serious dating.
Finding the person that I want to marry. This is serious dating. This is in later college and beyond. And it's not appropriate for teens to be in that kind of more intense, intentional relationship. But the thing is that it kind of like the responsibility flips, because just like courtship is not appropriate for teens, I'll be honest with you, I don't think friendship dating is appropriate for mature adults.
Right.
Because at that point in your life, if you're just like hanging out with somebody for fun for a year or two without no intention of marrying them or talking about marriage, you're just using that person.
Yeah.
So it's like one phase of life, this friendship dating is appropriate and courtship is not. And you know what? Courtship is really kind of like required when you are ready to be married.
Right.
That's what you should be doing. You should be looking for the person that God has for you to begin your vocation, to give yourself away.
And that's where we look at this whole idea of the kind of progression of what dating is.
Exactly.
Is because, I really do believe that all dating is oriented on some level towards marriage. But early on, it's just you're learning.
The lessons are easy.
It's building blocks
right.
of learning how to relate to the member of the opposite sex. What does that look like? It's and we'll get into this, but it's all of these building blocks that come in so that they see where this is going. And all of it is done in the context and not to the exclusion of their moral formation, their spiritual formation that's happening, right? And all that.
I just want to say one more thing about the yes culture before we kind of move off of that is what we would like you to just think about is that when you look at different types of parenting styles, okay, even psychological research or whatever, the worst type, the most harmful parenting style to children is the authoritarian parent.
Right.
The parent that is too harsh. That is actually the worst parenting style. And worst meaning it does the most harm to children.
That's right.
The second worst is the parent that actually I should say the worst is the parent who is neglectful, doesn't even care.
Yeah.
That's actually the worst. The indifference is worse.
Because the opposite of love isn't hate, it's indifference.
Okay,
right?
So that's the worst is that they don't even care. Then it's being too harsh. And then it's being too lax, being the permissive parent. And the reason I say that is because as a parent, especially of teenagers, if I am going to err on one side, if I'm going to err on do I be too harsh right now? Or do I err on the side of being too lax? But neither are good, right? The best parent is the authoritative parent, right? Just truth and love and respect and correction, boundaries, all of that, which we talk about. But if I'm going to err on one side, I would say err on the side of being too lax. The reason I say that is because of having that yes culture. Because sometimes if you give too much freedom, you can at least have that conversation with your child about what is happening.
Yes.
If you're too harsh and you crush them, then I feel like you are breaking your relationship with them. And I think that relationship with your teen is what it's so important that you choose your battles wisely because I want them to be independent. We want them to be independent.
Yes.
And so to do that, you have to give them freedom. Have we given our teens too much freedom sometime and regretted it? Absolutely. Absolutely. But you know what? I would rather do that than crush their spirits and then lead to a breaking of our relationship with them.
And just building off of this, I want to talk about why we think it's so important, which we've already kind of gleaned some of this, why it's so important for us to allow. That doesn't mean we force, propose, even encourage necessarily. We're just open to older teens.
We don't really even talk about it until they come to us and they say, so-and-so asked me out, or I want to take out this girl.
Yeah. So why do we think it's so important? The first reason is that we can still teach them. They're under our roof, right? We have an opportunity. And let me tell you this, when we're trying to teach a moral lesson they feel like it's just a catechetical instruction, it sometimes washes over them.
Right.
However, if they are motivated, we talked about the phones. If they're motivated to get a phone, talking about some of the dangers and even having them do some research on what are the dangers, what are the pitfalls, how do we avoid it? They are really motivated. So
they're more open to even accepting restrictions
because they see something in front of them. And so if you have a child come forward to you as a later teen, and you be able, there's like, this is something I really want. See that as an opportunity to mold, shape, and form them in a powerful way because they want to be a student. They want to grow. They want to be more adult-like and say,
when the student is ready, the teacher will appear.
That's right. And so if they see that and they see that openness and they see that opportunity, again, just as a, sorry, you talk.
I think we've used up all of our water. So one of the things as far as like teaching them and guiding them during this time of dating is that when they ask to take a young lady out or a guy wants to take her out, we always talk about the 3 horses.
Yeah.
Okay. 3 horses, and they are driving the chariot, driving the wagon, and they all have to work together. They all have to stay in line together. And those 3 horses are communication, physical closeness, and commitment.
Right.
And so communication meaning we would say emotional intimacy, right?
Right.
And
how much of their heart that they're sharing?
How much of your heart do you reveal? How much do you talk about? How vulnerable are you? Then there's that physical intimacy, holding hands, kissing, prolonged hugging, making out, all of those, there's different levels of that, right? And then there's commitment. And this is where we're talking about this like friendship dating.
How exclusive,
right?
what
How
level
exclusive
of
you
priority?
are. Courtship, where you absolutely have this person as a priority in your life, even above your friends, engagement, marriage. So all three of those things you shouldn't be totally revealing your heart to someone
right.
who you're in a friendship dating relationship with.
Yeah.
You also shouldn't be engaged to someone that you haven't revealed your heart to.
That's right. That's right.
Like you have to have, and obviously the physical intimacy as well. That kind of goes with that emotional intimacy. So all three of those, and that's a conversation we have with all of our kids. And that's also how we help them to kind of go slowly when they're young, not in a position to be married, then you got to go slow.
That's right.
In all three of these areas.
Yeah. And we want to rebuild a culture of marriage in our world. And it really begins with us and our kids looking at how do we rebuild and renew a true and holy and good dating culture.
Right.
That is oriented towards the right thing. And that there is, again, this progression. We don't want them to end up in a situation where they have jumped in on the deep end.
Yeah.
And they haven't seen, and again, under our roof, we have the ability to form, shape, and speak to their hearts. And then if they're coming to us now, and there's freedom, and this is a kind of a safe space for them to open up, and that we're not cutting that conversation or shutting that conversation down, it leaves the opportunity that even later, when they're not under our roof, they're going to be like, Mom and Dad had great wisdom. Mom and Dad helped me. And I remember our kids, when we had the, no, you're not dating in junior high, no, freshman, sophomore in high school, no, you're not. And I remember one child come back and saying, I am so glad that you didn't let me date, because I saw some of my friends and it was so awful to see the heartache. And they're just young hearts. And again, there still will have heartbreak,
intensity that's not needed.
That might be there, right?
Yeah.
But anyway, so you've got that. But then the other part of this, which again relies on teaching, is you have the beauty to teach them the roles of men and women. And this again, you have prior to this, you've had already the sex talk, you've had the conversation about maturity, what the difference is. They've witnessed what marriage, the roles that mom and dad play in the home. But then what you have is you have a guy, again, if you're talking about your son, or even the son asking or some other boy asking your daughter, the man who ought to take initiative, who should take a risk, to go out and ask a girl. And again, early on, it might be asking them to a dance at school, or some other kind of a swing dance or whatever, getting a girl to ask her out. There is a major amount of courage. And you know what? That is a good thing for a young man to have, to get out of himself and be like, what if she says no? Yep. Then you ask another girl. And then
you know what? And I've had talks with my girls, the fact that if a young man asks you to a dance, you really shouldn't say no.
Unless there's an issue or a concern.
Obviously. But I mean, I don't think, barring that, that's pretty extreme. But that you really shouldn't say no, because he took a lot of vulnerability to come and ask you.
Right.
And you should at least, even if it's just going out, even in, going to a dance or going out for coffee or something, give him a chance. Once, maybe twice. Once, if it's not horrible, then maybe twice. But then after twice, to learn how to say, you know what, I just don't think this is working out. And you know what?
And that's okay.
We have beautiful daughters. And I think all of them have had to say to guys, I'm sorry, I don't think this is it.
And that's okay.
And to learn how to do that with kindness and
there's so much too. And again, we won't be able to get into everything, but there's so much formation that happens in how they do that. And even the communication, we'll get into some conversations that we've had with young men and as well as our daughters and sons. But there's this also, I guess this is kind of going back to one of the reasons why this is so important, is that there was this dating project that came out maybe almost 10 years ago. And they looked at this phenomena that in our world today.
It was a college professor who saw this. Yeah. Sociology professor.
They didn't find that any of the students were dating. They weren't asking people out. They had never done it. They'd never done the traditional go out and ask someone to go out on a date and so forth. And again, interesting sociological study, but then there was a movie that was
link to it below. Yeah.
But again, the point of that is that our world has lost the art of dating.
And so we as parents, we need to teach that.
That's
and
right.
guess what?
And it's right for us to be teaching them.
And if your kids are away at college, as lovely, wonderful Catholic colleges there are out there, you're not going to have that opportunity to be there and help form them in this.
I remember, and we were with some friends over the summer, shout out to them for doing this. But they created they teach dancing to teenagers and college students, and they do it with the intent of teaching young men to get up and go across the room and ask that girl to dance. And for the girl to
say
respond,
yes.
right?
Yes.
And both of them need to learn and see how that works. And there's just something really healthy and good and natural and right.
And I think it's good and right if it happens maybe while they're still underneath your roof.
Yes.
So another reason is that there's an additional opportunity for formation. And this is kind of like we've been talking about all along, but even not just formation in relationships, but formation for their own hearts.
Yeah.
To recognize that, you know what? I don't need my affirmation from the fact that I am dating a good-looking guy.
That's big.
Or I'm dating a beautiful woman. That's not where my affirmation comes from. My affirmation comes from the fact that I am a son or daughter of God. And I'm in this relationship to help to bring this person closer to heaven. If we're friends and we can get each other one step closer to heaven, you know what? One of our sons told me that he and his teenage girlfriend literally had this conversation that they said, and they're young, they were still teenagers, and said, you know, we want to make sure that we're helping each other get to heaven, even in this friendship that we're having right now. And that's really the purpose. And to have that kind of perspective, even if, you know, like they're just friends now, but even to be able to have that and carry that onward to when you're more seriously dating. Because if they can learn that friendship at this level, that lesson at this level, that every relationship is to bring us closer to God, I am more confident than when he gets to the place when he is ready to be married and he is looking for the woman to marry. Hey, if he was doing that when he was 17, he's definitely going to be doing that when he's looking for a lifetime partner.
That's right.
And that's something that he has that opportunity when the stakes are low. You know, the stakes are low because what if you start dating a girl and you're like, yeah, we don't believe in the same things. Then it's good to recognize that.
And say, this is what I don't want.
Exactly.
And one of the things that I do with our daughters is I take them out when they're 13. And as their dad, take them on a special date. And this is really the first, I may have taken them out for little special things, but we get really dressed up.
Yeah.
And we go out and I buy them a special ring and we have this whole conversation. And in the conversation, I do talk about dating and I talk about boys and I talk about how they need to guard their heart. And I talk about what does that mean? How do they? And
the thing is, you're talking about dating to a 13-year-old, but if they weren't dating until they were 22, this isn't going to mean anything.
That's right.
But they're saying, okay, this is something that's coming up in the next few years.
And I plant the seed that they're not allowed to go out with a young man until he has asked me permission. And it's important that they know that. But it's also important that they know that I have their heart and that they are loved outside. Like just going back to the idea of affirmation. Again, we've talked about this a lot. The importance of parents making sure your kids know at the core of who they are good, that they are loved, and they are worthy of love.
Right.
And so that they don't get treated so that later on, when somebody else doesn't treat them well, they'd be like, nope, that's not real love.
You know, it's a good little lesson for this is the word life, L-I-F-E. And if you look at L representing love, I represents infatuation, crush, puppy love.
Oh, yeah.
F, friendship, and E, exploitation. So the I and the F in the middle there, that infatuation and friendship, that's pretty much the dating relationship that we're talking about.
In the early years.
In the early years. And then when you're going into courtship, you're looking at that is moving more towards love, the true gift of self, willing the good of the other. But what the kids have to be aware of is that it could also move to exploitation. And exploitation, I mean, that's a big word, but really what I mean by that is just using the other person.
Yeah.
Using the other person to make me look good. Using the other person to make me feel good about myself. And it's good for kids to realize that you want to always be moving towards love and make sure that you're not exploiting other people or using them in any way. And also that you're not the one that's being used. To have your eyes wide open, because we can all tend towards that because we're all sinful people.
Right.
But we have to recognize that in relationships. And I feel like when they're young, they're so open to having these kinds of conversations. And so, because we really want them to have that healthy relationship.
And let me ask you this, and your parents, I look at as a true model in so many ways. Did your parents ever talk to you about dating and physical relationship?
Yes.
So that didn't happen in my home. Almost everybody I talked to, they never had a conversation
Yeah.
from their parents about sex, let alone what is dating and what happens with our 16, 17, 18-year-olds who do choose to date. Because not all of our 10 have chosen to or pursued that or were pursued, right? That didn't happen for all of them. So don't feel like it's every single kid. But when it did, it opened that conversation up.
Right.
And it gave us an opportunity. And then what it did require us to have is get over our discomfort, because some of these topics are a little uncomfortable at first, but then it's actually, it showed me how to have a respectful conversation that gave freedom, but real wisdom to our boys and to our girls, where they're growing and they're like, hey, just so you know, this is an appropriate way to touch. And this is not appropriate.
Right.
And I have a whole list of things that we kind of go through, but just to even be very specific, for some, particularly for boys to know, for my young men to know, this is a way that shows respect for a girl. And this is a way that doesn't.
And those conversations are easier to have with a 16, 17-year-old than with like a 20, 21-year-old,
right,
where he may feel like you're kind of talking down to him.
That's right.
And just like you were saying before, in having this policy, we have had to be more aware.
Yeah.
Like we saw, one of our sons up late texting all night. We had to be aware of that. Put a stop to that.
Right.
No,
One,
no
he
bueno.
shouldn't have his phone.
Right.
Period.
Exactly.
But
exactly.
in seeing, and again, we don't believe it's spying to be able to tell our kids, this is while you're under our roof. We try to keep some level of privacy. We don't go into things, but then to see, okay,
I wouldn't take their phone without them knowing or anything like that. Yeah.
But then to share, hey, you've got a lot of communication going on here.
Right.
And that's what parents are for. These are teaching moments to say, hey, we talked about this is an appropriate level of commitment, time commitment, but you have actually stepped over some lines. Hey, let's pull it back a little bit. It didn't always go easily, but they understood.
Yeah.
Even if they didn't agree, they understood. And then we had the means by which to make sure while they're under our roof that they do spend their time wisely, that they do invest in their guy friends for the boys and so forth, as well as the girls. And
we had one of our daughters dating some guy who was basically a loser. I mean, he was a lovely son of God. Whatever.
He was a loser. And we ended up, I ended up having to block him. On the phone, and I talked to him and said, "You're no longer to talk to my daughter,"
because he was disrespectful to her, and it sent the message to her. Now, if she was away at college and that was her first relationship, we wouldn't have been able to be aware of that. But having her in our home and being able to kind of like test the waters, so to speak, and really to see this is not the way you should be treated.
That's right. You don't deserve that.
You don't deserve to be treated like this. We're done.
And then having that conversation with my daughter, she didn't like it at first, but then understood and later thanked me for it. Yeah. We don't do this for thanks. We don't do this for, and again, I think dads, this is a big part for our job is to step in situations like that. But moms and dads can step in and look at this and say, yeah, this isn't good for you. And so again, it does heighten our responsibility. But I think it's really powerful. There
might be some people listening who would say, well, if you didn't allow them to date, then you wouldn't have had those situations at all. And I kind of disagree with that because, like I said, having grown up in and knowing a lot of kids who have grown up in a no dating culture, those kinds of things happen anyway.
They do. And
you may not think they do, moms and dads, but they do.
And now having talked to a ton of our kids and their friends,
yes,
we found plenty of kids who were sneaking around.
Right.
And when you keep things in the darkness, it doesn't go well for anybody.
And so that's kind of what I would say is one of the disadvantages of a no dating policy is, first of all, you are setting up conflict with your teen in an area that you can give freedom in. Like going back to that whole idea of the yes culture, right? We want to say yes as much as possible and to really think, is this really a problem with my teen? Do I really think they are not mature enough to handle this? Or is this a problem with me? Do I have a problem with something?
Is there a fear?
Is there a fear in me?
Am I responding? Am I responding
Exactly.
to my past? Am I responding to the world out there? Respond to your teen. Respond to the situation in front of you.
Respond to the child who is in front of you, not the child that is inside of you that you haven't dealt with yet.
Because when we do this, we set ourselves up for a long-term life of success with our kids. Because as moms and dads, our job never ends.
Right.
But it changes dramatically when they're no longer under our roof. They move into an adulthood where we do want to make sure. I mean, again, there's this idea of progression that we want to build Christian maturity, right?
Yes.
We're early on, we're fixated on protecting their innocence, but we need to quickly move to building Christian maturity. And that requires us, or it puts us in a position to be a guide to help them navigate for the rest of their lives.
Right.
Like we're still working on the adult children thing. We're making mistakes and we're working through that.
No podcast coming up on that.
But really as parents, you want to set yourself up as a lifelong companion and guide for your kids, even into their college years, into their early marriages, because you want to be that guide who they can turn to and say, I trust you.
Yeah.
Your wisdom isn't just about control. Your wisdom is for my happiness and my goodness.
Yeah.
And that's
always,
important.
When our boys would say, I really like this girl, and my first response is always, I am so glad. I am so happy that you like girls.
Yes, I always say that.
And I think that should be our attitude and not, oh my God, you like a girl. Repress, put it down. It's like, no, why would you be like that? You should, beautiful. You are attracted to a beautiful woman. I love that. That literally should be every parent's response when their kid says, oh, I like this girl, or I like this boy. And not because coming down harsh of like, well, that right there, you got to repress that, man. Then your kids aren't going to feel free to be honest with you or tell you about their struggles or their relationship difficulties or, whatever. And
again, when you put it in the dark, right?
Yeah. It's
again,
power.
And I want to keep it super chill, super casual when they're in high school. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Right. And within some very clear parameters, right? But when you stamp it out completely, when you suppress when you try to, it does sometimes when they really desire it, but it also may unintentionally give them the false impression that their desires are wrong.
Yeah.
That there's something wrong with them. If there's something wrong with their orientation or their desires in some real way, that their feelings are bad. And again, they need to be formed. They need to be properly oriented, and maturity always comes in. And again, a specific date, like we talk about 16 doesn't mean they're mature, right?
Mm-hmm. Not for some kids.
And so there are healthy boundaries that may not be at that specific time, but we think that's a great general rule so as to begin that deeper formation for them. Because I would love to be able for parents to look back and say, hey, in the last 2 years of time that you're under our roof completely and under our full authority, that we have done our level best to set you up for success for the rest of your virtuous, moral, faithful Christian life, right? And this simple idea of not giving them a deep fear for it, but also giving them a level of respect. Mm-hmm. Again, but not respect that they're ready to go out and marry somebody or act like they're married.
Exactly.
Or that they have it all figured out. Don't treat them foolishly. Don't be the naive parent.
Right.
But on the other side, let's not come down too hard.
Because I think that when we don't allow older teens to date, you kind of make it a bigger deal than it has to be. Yeah. And it kind of leads to this and this is what I saw, it leads to an intensity of clandestine relationships that are not necessary.
Yeah, we don't want Romeo and Juliet happening.
Exactly.
No poison involved.
Exactly. It's just once you say don't do this, all of a sudden it becomes more attractive. And I think it's kind of like one of those one of those battles that it's just not worth fighting. It's just not worth fighting about. Right. Because if you don't want to miss this chance to guide your kids in this important skill, because for us, we've been able to meet the boyfriends that our daughters have brought home when they were in high school. We've been able to have the girlfriends in high school girlfriends over our house and have them being part of our family life, to an extent. And if they're away at college, you may not even have that opportunity.
So with the fact that I've had I do have 6 daughters, and I've walked through
4 adult daughters and 2 teenage daughters.
Right. And so I've walked through a number of conversations. I love having conversations with boyfriends now. There's always this little moment of like, or like, gosh, I got to figure this out. But I've written down so many times, I've revised and edited and so forth. And I think
what are the ages of the boys that you've talked to?
Everywhere from 16 to 26.
Yep. To
and
current son-in-laws.
That's right. And
we'll have to get Jorge and Alex. We'll have to get Jorge and Alex on here sometime. Do a little bonus episode.
That would be interesting.
Be like,
they're the ones who made it through
the dating talk.
And so I'm just going to give some high level thoughts. And I've other dads. Everything we have is wisdom we've stolen from other people, and I've adjusted or modified and so forth. But there is an important conversation for a dad. And I really felt like this was like I stepped into an advanced class when I started having boyfriend conversations. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I begin with is I use the analogy of driving a car, because they usually are all driving.
No, tell them what you say. So what's the first thing? You sit down with these young men, right? So I'm the young man, right? So let's pretend. So I'm saying, Mr. Hernan, so nice to meet you here. I'm trying to shake your hand. Oh, okay. Oh, so nice to meet you, sir. I want to date your daughter.
No. And
what do you say?
What do I say? Is like, all right, well then I want to have a conversation. I don't know where you're probably leading someplace that I'm not thinking right now.
No, the car thing.
Yeah. So I say to them, again, this is when they're younger, right? I don't always use this with college and up, but younger boys, I say, hey, would you mind if I borrowed your car?
Oh, why? Why do you need my car, Mr. Hernan?
Don't worry. I'll take good care of it. But I just wanted to see it.
Sure.
Would you mind?
I guess so. Boyfriend thinking weirdo. No, I'm just kidding. Go ahead.
And I use this and I say, okay, so if I borrowed your car, do you like your car? Do you take care of your car?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I remember one boy said, oh yeah, my grandpa gave me this car. It was his car. Really he gave it to me. Yes. I love this car.
And I said, okay, so would it be okay for me to damage your car and return it back to you?
What?
Would you be comfortable with that if I put it in a wreck?
No.
And I said, no, that would be stupid. That would be wrong. That would not be just, that wouldn't be appropriate. I said, so would it be appropriate for you if you were lending me your car to have a couple rules? Like, hey, when you return the car, I returned it to you clean. And it was all in one piece. It was a full tank of gas. You may have some things like, hey, no smoking in the car. Would it be appropriate for you to have those rules?
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense.
All right. So what we're talking about here is something more precious to me than any car ever will be. And there's probably a little bit more buildup in the moment, right? But it's saying, okay, so
it works really well.
But then saying, hey, so guy, you want to date my daughter. And do you understand why I want to have some parameters on this, some rules to guide this dating relationship? And they're like, okay, I get it, sir. I get it. And then usually, and I try not to, there's a lot of guys who will boast that, I'm sharpening my knives, or I have the gun out, or I really don't want to set him off, because what I want is I want honesty, and I want to be able to speak, because I really see this as an opportunity. And this is the one correction that Katie, our friend, shared with us. I said, only dads can have this conversation with young men. And she said, no, I think moms can too.
And I think she's probably right.
And she's right and I'm wrong.
As a single mom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, but I love this because I'm able to speak man to man about things that matter to somebody who isn't my own child. And so I felt like I am doing this for my daughter, but I'm also looking at this young man and saying, I want to make sure, one, as a check, as a protective father on who my daughter is going to be with. But two, I want to speak a little bit of truth and charity into this young man's life and see this as an opportunity to open for him, because now he's motivated.
Yeah.
He's motivated to listen to me in a way that other men may not have been.
Right.
And I'd say, okay, well, what do you see? And then we kind of go through and say, what do you see dating as? Mm-hmm. And depending on where they respond to what they perceive dating as, I've gotten the simple, like, hey, we're just going to have some fun and, blah, blah, to, this is about preparing for marriage. I've got, gotten answers from all the way in between.
Because that whole thing with the car, that's a conversation you had with the young men.
That's right.
But the older men, the men who were actual men,
Yeah.
you don't really need to start that way because they, like, for example, when you talk to Jorge knew why you were talking to him.
That's right.
And actually, first conversation with Jorge's like, I want to marry your daughter.
I know. I'm like, the what? Hi, my name is Mike.
So when Mike comes out from talking to Jorge, first conversation, I said, so how'd it go? He goes, he straight up told me he wants to marry Katie. And I was like, what? Not that I'm surprised but it was very straightforward.
What was really funny was that he says, but I'm not asking for your permission yet. I'm not ready.
He did say that. Yes, he did say that.
To do that. And I will come back to you when I blah, 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 which was like, awesome. Because obviously I'm like, good thing Katie clued him in. Because that's what happens is these young men come because my daughters have said, you got to talk to my dad.
That's true.
And so I want to, and the reason I don't want to intimidate them is I want my daughters are very nervous about what are you going to say, Dad? And so I tell them, look, the things that we share are between you and me.
You say that to the young man,
right?
Yeah.
And I do tell our daughters that I said, this is a confidential conversation, but I'm not going to scare him. I'm not going to threaten him.
Right.
Exactly. But I want to find out what he believes dating is. And then again, we use those ideas of the 3 horses. And I do share a little bit more. I talk about how dating is oriented towards giving of ourselves and toward love. And love does not use, doesn't abuse, doesn't exploit. I do go through some specific things about what is appropriate and inappropriate physical contact. And every boy I ask, I said, can you tell me? And this is when I also share, before I do this, I share my story a little bit, my testimony of my struggles as a young man and as a teenager and alcohol and divorced family and all of that. And then I kind of end talking about my faith. And I say, that's why this is really important to me, because my faith, my family is at the core of who I am. So I want you to know that. And so that when I allow you to date my daughter, I want you to know that she has been given to you as pure and virtuous and untainted. And I expect her to be returned in the exact same condition, except better. And if you don't do that, I will hunt you down. But it becomes
kind of,
that is the only level of threat that I have. And then I also
it's like a sternness.
Yeah, and that's the. I don't know if I'd say it's a threat. It's a boldness of looking him eye to eye as a man, saying,
don't
with
go
my
there.
eyes, I will break you. Yeah.
You don't have to say the words.
I don't say it because it comes across
because he gets it.
But then I also ask every young man, after I kind of share my story and share that, I do ask them about pornography, which I think would be difficult for a single mom to ask. I said everything else probably can be asked, but I ask them, I say, look, I've been in men's groups. I just kind of break that. I'm like, there have rarely been men who haven't at some point, but I want to know, where are you at?
Yeah.
And what are you doing about it?
Yeah.
And I want to say, I think every man was honest with me.
Yeah.
And varying degrees of struggle, varying degrees. I've had some that had 0, which was awesome. And I actually believed them. And then there are others that shared it. And I said, well,
they're in the fight.
They're in the fight. And I tell them, and if they're not in the fight, I said, I don't think you're ready to date anybody until you work on this. I said, you don't have to be completely done, but you have to be working on it. And that plan doesn't feel like you're working it enough. What are you going to do? And I just challenge him. I say, as a man, I want this for your good. Right?
Yeah.
And so there is something good there. I have like whole notes on stuff when they're younger about things they can and can't do. Blankets. We don't allow them to share a blanket. And, we invite them to come over.
No parking.
No with our daughters, no making out in car. Like I go through all of these things so that they understand this and say, this is very serious to us. And I said, but then there's a high chance this relationship won't continue on. I said, just based on statistics. I said, I hope you guys are great and you have a lot of enjoy, but never everything my daughter has shared with you, you need to keep in confidences. This is not something you share with others out there. And I said, and when and if you need to break up with my daughter, you don't do it over a text or social media. You actually come and visit her face to face. Have the courage and the decency to be a man and show up. And again, this man is actually motivated to listen to me because he won't be able to date my daughter otherwise. And so it's not only teaching and forming for my kids, and I do tell them some of the basic parameters so they know, I don't want you breaking up through a text. I don't want you damaging
you would expect
anybody's
the same,
right? And keeping their confidences and all of that, right? And so, again, there's more, and I don't want to go into it, but I talk about the purposes of dating and some of those ground rules.
I think we should do a son-in-law podcast.
All right.
We can get into more of our.
You know what I did is
things,
in advance of this podcast, I did put it out to our adult children.
We'll have a bonus podcast.
So I want to actually propose this, that we do a video only. Right now, I'll do it as before this goes live as a podcast. We'll record an interview with at least one of our adult children.
Okay.
Because they have some very good ideas and what they experienced as a teenager and why they think, this freedom that was given, why it was good, some pitfalls and some advantages, and what their experience is now as they've gone on as an adult.
Okay, we got to wrap this up. I got to get out of here.
Oh my gosh,
I'm over time.
60.
So, first of all, key takeaways. First, not all dating is the same. It's different levels of dating.
Right. We want to see that progression.
Want to have some kind of progression. 2, we got to prepare our kids for healthy relationships. And this includes giving them dating guidance. 3, create a yes culture in your home. Freedom and responsibility go together. And then last, casual dating is for teens. Serious dating is when you're ready for marriage and college and beyond, and don't confuse them. Okay.
Should we do the couple of discussion questions? Is that all right?
Sure.
All right. So have we created, so this is for you and your spouse thing, have we created a yes culture in general in our home?
Talk about
oriented
that more.
Towards the good, oriented towards them, right? And their eternal happiness. What was your dating experience like? So let's just talk to each other, because that's going to influence the way you look at dating and you have some wisdom based on that experience. I would
share with your children your dating experience, to be honest with you.
And what would you like your children to imitate or not imitate with your experience? Right. So again, passing that on. And what are your rules for dating with your kids? Because again, the sooner you can get on the same page with you and your spouse, everything from curfews to how much do you want to talk? Who's going to have that conversation? What are the roles between mom and dad in communicating this effectively? All right. So again, thank you for listening to us. And if this was helpful to you, we'd love to hear from you. We'd love for you to share this with a friend. And if you have questions or you have different opinions or suggestions for us, please send them in via email. We love getting listener feedback and sharing with us any of your insights. And again, we talked about the survey at the beginning. If you can take 10 minutes or so and complete that survey, that would be super helpful. Until next time, may the Lord bless you and keep you.